You're watching live from Paris here on France 24. Good to have you with us. And these are our top stories this hour. Chinese tech giant Huawei is suing the United States. It filed a lawsuit against a law that labels the company a security risk and forbids a number of government bodies from using its equipment. Germany says the decision to expel its ambassador from Venezuela only makes matters worse. The German representative given 48 hours to leave after the foreign ministry deemed him an interference. Venezuela also deported a freelance journalist who reported for US media. And a French court set to deliver its verdict in the trial of Cardinal Philippe Barbarin, the archbishop accused of covering up sexual abuse of minors by one of his priests. He could be given 3 years in jail. Also coming up in this hour in business, Facebook makes a pitch to become a privacy-focused platform, but will users buy it? And also in sport, Manchester United through to the quarter-finals of the Champions League, beating Paris Saint-Germain on their home turf 3-1. The French champions out despite going into the game with a 2-0 advantage from the first leg. Chinese tech giant Huawei is suing the United States. Specifically, the company has filed a suit against a law passed in the US that blocks certain government agencies from using equipment from a very short list of companies that includes Huawei. Washington has long feared that data obtained by Huawei could be seen by authorities in China. Well, from Beijing, our correspondent Charles Pellegrin told us more about Huawei's arguments in this case and what their chances are of succeeding.
Huawei is really on the offensive here, and that what they're trying to attack is a 2018 law passed by the U.S. Congress that bans U.S. government agencies and their contractors of using any services and equipment provided by Huawei. Now, their main this was based obviously on intelligence by the U.S. government that said that Huawei posed a national security risk and was a risk of espionage. Now, Huawei is saying that there has actually not been any proof that has been presented that suggests that Huawei actually is a security risk, and they're also saying that this law is in breach of fair competition rules on the American markets. They're also saying that this law is in breach of the separation of powers because the legislative branch, which is Congress, basically did the work of the judiciary branch, which is the U.S. courts. This is the argument of Huawei. They're also accusing the United States government of pirating Huawei's emails. Now, what are the chances that this will actually succeed, that this lawsuit will succeed? They're pretty low at this point because the U.S. courts are not in the habit of second-guessing decisions made by the U.S. government on the basis of national security concerns. But they're not necessarily doing it to win. They're doing it to basically defend their honor on the world stage and prove to everyone around the world that they are a company that can be trusted, especially with the next generation of wireless networks that are bound to be set up soon, known as 5G.
It aggravates the situation. Germany reacting to the move by Venezuela to expel its ambassador. The foreign ministry gave Daniel Kriener 48 hours to leave, accusing him of interference. He was one of the foreign representatives who greeted opposition leader Juan Guaido on his return to the country Monday. Naomi Lloyd tells us more.
He's been given 48 hours to leave Venezuela. The German ambassador declared persona non grata by the government of Nicolás Maduro. He's accused of repeated acts of meddling in internal affairs. He was amongst diplomats from more than 10 countries who welcomed opposition leader Juan Guaido at the airport in Caracas on his return on Monday. He's the only one so far to be expelled. At his first appearance back at the National Assembly, after a tour of Latin America, where he campaigned for the overthrow of President Nicolás Maduro, Guaido took the opportunity to criticize the Venezuelan government's decision.
So, usurpers, the only ones not grata in Venezuela are you. Those who help, like Germany. Know this, Venezuela? That's why the government expels them.
Germany, which recognises Guaido as interim president, says the decision will only escalate tensions. Venezuelans battered by an economic meltdown and a major political crisis are struggling to access basic goods, including food and medicine. On Wednesday, the UN Human Rights Chief said sanctions have worsened the crisis.
This situation has been exacerbated by sanctions, and the resulting current political, economic, social and institutional crisis is alarming. The unprecedented numbers of Venezuelans compelled to leave their homes and country also has serious consequences across the region.
Washington said it was considering new sanctions to pressure Maduro to give up power.
Well, meanwhile, an American journalist who has worked in Venezuela for many years as a correspondent for US media has now been deported by the security services. He had been questioned for 12 hours before being released and sent to the airport. Here in France, another verdict expected in a high-profile case, that of Cardinal Philippe Barbarin. He's accused of covering up sexual abuse of minors by one of his priests. He faces up to 3 years in jail and a fine of €45,000 if found guilty. He says he can't see what he's actually guilty of. Alison Sargent takes us through the case.
He's become a household name in France, associated with the Catholic Church's cover-up of sexual abuse. But Cardinal Philippe Barbarin has always maintained his innocence, saying he never attempted to shield predatory priests. 3 years ago, when the scandal erupted, he said the justice system would exonerate him.
Is it beyond the statute of limitations or not? Most of the crimes, thank God, are beyond the statute of limitations. Some may not be. It's the justice system that will decide.
This response drew controversy, with many accusing the cardinal of trying to hide behind the law. Now 68 years old, Barbarin's accused of keeping silent over the sexual abuse carried out by one of his priests in Lyon. Bernard Prénat allegedly abused dozens of young Boy Scouts in the 1980s and early 90s. His trial date hasn't been set yet. French prosecutors had decided not to press charges against Barbarin, in part because of the statute of limitations. But 9 of the victims insisted on taking the cardinal to court. They say he knew about the abuse since at least 2010, and that laws concerning the statute of limitations need to be interpreted differently.
The trial has allowed for a debate on the application and the boundaries of the law concerning the reporting of crimes, which is a precious means of prevention. That alone is already a victory.
Victims hope the trial will be part of a new era of accountability in the Catholic Church. If found guilty, Cardinal Barbarin and 5 of his former aides could be given up to 3 years in prison.
Now, a verdict is due in the trial of a Frenchman accused of killing 4 people at a Jewish museum in Brussels back in 2014. The 33-year-old faces a possible life sentence. He is thought to be the first fighter to have come back from Syria to stage an attack in Europe. As the court wrapped up the hearing, the accused said he had been tricked. Our correspondent in Brussels, Dave Keating, is at the courthouse for us.
This is concerning that terrorist attack on the Jewish Museum of Brussels, which is just down the street from here at the Palais de Justice, where Mehdi Nemmouche is on trial for that attack. Now, he's accused of killing 2 Israeli tourists and 2 workers at the museum. And this case is being very closely watched, largely because of its connections with Syria. Nemmouche served time in a French jail before traveling to Syria, and he's accused of being part of ISIS and acting as an interrogator and torturer for people who have testified at this trial. They say they recognize him from their time in captivity in Syria, and he is definitely the same person. And so this has a lot of significance because 2014 makes that one of, or really the first big attack by a returned foreign fighter from Syria. And of course, we know that there were several attacks after that in Brussels, in Paris, having the same MO. Back in 2014, after this Jewish museum attack took place, authorities in Belgium were warning that they suspected that more people were going to be coming. And so this case is really acting as a test trial in how to prosecute these returned foreign fighters who carry out terrorist attacks in Europe and were also involved with ISIS in the Syrian war. Of course, with those witnesses giving testimony, it's kind of combining those 2 things. Now, the jury has been deliberating in a hotel here in Brussels, and we're told to expect a verdict today that could always come later in case the jury needs more more time. But if Nemmouche is convicted, he will face a lifetime sentence. Now, he also has a co-defendant, which is a 30-year-old man named Nasser Bendra. He's accused of supplying weapons to Nemmouche, but Bendra denies any knowledge of or involvement in the attack.
Dave Keating there in Brussels. Well, let's take a look now at some other news in brief. It was thought to be a tiny village, but still more people are fleeing the final pocket of land controlled by the Islamic State group in Syria. Kurdish officers with the Syrian Democratic Force said over 3,000 people left on Tuesday alone, with reporters witnessing hundreds more on Wednesday. A Palestinian teenager killed by Israeli fire during renewed clashes along the Gaza border. So says the health ministry there. The Israeli army has not commented on that, but said it did respond to rocks and explosive devices being thrown at soldiers along the border area. And a strike at Kenya's international airport has been suspended for now, but that was not before the hub was brought to a standstill on Wednesday. Hundreds of passengers stranded, some treated for exposure to tear gas after police used it to disperse the striking workers. Flight operations currently said to be running pretty much as normal. Now, a penalty in injury time sends Manchester United through to the Champions League quarter-finals with a 3-1 win over Paris Saint-Germain. A result in difference with their previous face-off in the United Kingdom, in which Paris Saint-Germain came out on top with a 2-0 win advantage.
Heartbreak in Paris. For the third consecutive year, Paris Saint-Germain has been knocked out of the Champions League in the round of 16. This time it was Manchester United's Marcus Rashford in a last-minute penalty that sent the Parisians packing.
Once again, we were knocked out at the same stage of the competition, at the same stage of the season. And it was the most important moment, where we had to be at the top of our game. We had to play the best match possible. We bombed it, and it was unacceptable in a match like that.
With 2 goals and 10 injured players down heading into the game, it should have been an impossible task for Manchester United to orchestrate a comeback. But things immediately started off badly for the home team as Man U's Romelu Lukaku scored just 2 minutes after kickoff. By the end of the match, the Red Devils had managed to beat Paris 3-1, with Manchester manager Solskjaer calling it a classic Man U evening.
We always believed, that's the thing. It wasn't about having the ball and outplaying them, because if you give this team too much space and time with Mbappe, you saw a few times in the first half when we missed our defensive shape, they threw us straight away. So the plan was to get the first goal, be in the game with 5 minutes to go or 10 minutes to go, and we were.
It's the first time a team is kicked out of the Champions League after winning with a 2-goal difference in the away game. Manchester United will have to wait for a March 15th draw to find out who they will face in the quarter-finals.
In Germany, things are slowly starting to change. Let's hope we won't have a Europe war. The words of Albert Einstein in a letter to his son back in 1935. Part of an extensive display of the Nobel Prize winner's personal and scientific writings held by Jerusalem's Hebrew University. It's a collection that it's unveiling on the run-up to what would have been Einstein's 140th birthday.
A new peek into the mind of Albert Einstein, further revealing not only the breadth of his genius, but also the complexity of a man grappling with the rise of Nazi Germany. The Hebrew University in Israel has made public a collection of 110 manuscript pages written by the world-renowned physicist.
These papers reflect the way Einstein was thinking, the way Einstein was working. Most of them, in his handwriting, are mathematical derivations, mathematical calculations with very little text. They are summaries of his thoughts. Whenever something struck him, a new idea, he sat down immediately, scribbled it, looking for its consequences.
Most of the documents are handwritten mathematical calculations behind his scientific writings. Among them, the solution to what's been called an Albert Einstein puzzle in the form of a formerly missing manuscript page. The writings also reveal Einstein's lucidity about the changing political scene in Germany. In one 1935 letter to his son, he expresses fears of war and concern about the rise of the Nazi Party. In another letter to a friend, he confesses embarrassment over the fact that he did not speak Hebrew. Albert Einstein was awarded the 1921 Nobel Prize for Physics.
But his myriad accomplishments didn't protect him from the risk of anti-Semitic persecution by the Nazi regime. He renounced his German citizenship in March of 1933. He then settled in the United States, where he died in 1955. March 14th will mark the 140th anniversary of Albert Einstein's birth.